In a world full of shifting truths, there is one story that has never changed, never weakened, and never lost its power across generations. But what if I told you most people only know fragments of it? They know the holidays. They know the cultural shorthand. But they do not know the full picture. Because hidden inside the life of Jesus Christ is a pattern, a precise, unyielding framework that explains suffering, purpose, betrayal, hope, and even victory over death itself. And once you see it clearly, you don't just understand ancient history, you start to understand your own life. But before we go there, there's something you need to notice. Look back at the timeline of humanity. Almost every culture talks about a good man, a teacher or a prophet. History is filled with brilliant philosophers, conquering emperors and visionary leaders. But only one life divides history itself into the before and for after. And that alone raises a question most people never sit long enough to answer. Why does the story of Jesus still echo this strongly? Even after 2,000 years, empires like Rome rose and collapsed into dust. Kings who demanded to be worshipped are now footnotes in history books. Yet a carpenter from the Middle East, who never wrote a book, never commanded an army, and never held political office, remains the focal point of human history. What if there's more to his life than what you've been told in passing? Because the story didn't begin with miracles. It didn't begin with crowds. It began in silence. A young woman in Nazareth, an ordinary, dusty village far from the centers of power. No influence, no fame, no platform. And yet, into that hidden, overlooked place, something impossible was announced. A child conceived not by human will, but by divine promise. At first glance it looks simple, almost too simple. But history often hides its greatest turning points in the smallest beginnings. And that's where the tension begins to rise. Because every expectation about power, both then and now, says greatness should arrive with noise. It should come with wealth, influence, and immediate recognition. But in this story, greatness arrives in a feeding trough, a manger. There was no royal palace, no announcement to kings and senators first, no global audience, just shepherds in a dark field, hearing a message that didn't make sense to human logic, but carried immense weight in the spirit. And here's where the story quietly challenges everything we think we know about importance. From the very beginning, the life of Jesus doesn't follow the pattern of human success. It follows something deeper, something inverted, something completely unexpected. He grows up unseen. Think about that. 30 years. There is almost no record of fame in his early years. No public stage. Just silence, woodworking, learning, obedience, and time. And that alone creates a massive tension with how we define significance today. Because in our modern world, visibility is value. If you aren't seen, you don't matter. We rush the process to get to the platform, but in his life, obscurity was preparation. The waiting wasn't wasted. It was the foundation. Then suddenly everything shifts. A voice in the wilderness, a man named John, a call to repentance. And Jesus steps into public life not with a self-promotional campaign, but with baptism. He aligns himself with humanity, and the moment he rises from the water, something happens that changes the trajectory of history. The heavens open. A voice declares identity. This is my beloved Son. A new phase begins. But instead of stepping into immediate victory, instead of marching to Jerusalem to take a throne, he is led into the barren wilderness. 40 days, hunger, isolation, intense psychological and spiritual testing. And here is where the pattern begins to vividly reveal itself to us. Because right after divine confirmation comes intense pressure. Right after identity is declared comes temptation. Right after purpose is revealed comes resistance. If you've ever wondered why your own life feels like a season of progress followed immediately by a brutal struggle, this moment holds a mirror to that exact human experience. But the story doesn't stop in the desert, because after the wilderness comes movement, He begins to teach, not with the complex, exclusionary academic jargon of the religious elite, but with clarity. He tells stories about seeds planted in dirt, light piercing the dark lost coins, and fathers running toward broken, rebellious sons. And slowly, profoundly, something starts to happen. People begin to see themselves in his words. Fishermen leave their nets. Tax collectors, thieves of their own people, change their direction. The rejected find belonging. The sick find physical and spiritual restoration. And yet, at the exact same time, a dark tension grows in the background. Because truth always creates two reactions. It either transforms you, or it threatens you. And here is where a deeper layer emerges. The more good he does, the more opposition he attracts. The more truth he speaks, the more the religious and political systems resist him. It doesn't look like failure, but it certainly doesn't look like worldly success either. And that creates a hidden question beneath everything we read in the Gospels. If this is the perfect life of righteousness, why does it move toward conflict instead of comfort? Then comes a moment that shifts everything again. A table, bread broken, wine poured, words spoken about betrayal. Because even within closeness, there is fracture. One of his own disciples, someone who ate with him, walked with him, saw the miracles, agrees to hand him over for the price of a slave. Suddenly, the story turns from teaching to surrender. He is arrested in the dark of a garden. But note this, he is not arrested because he is weak. He is arrested because he refuses to escape what he came to fulfill. When he could have called down armies, he tells his followers to put away their swords. Then comes the trial. There is blatant injustice. There is false accusation. The systems of human justice entirely fail the author of justice. And in the face of false judgment, there is silence. In that silence, something incredibly heavy happens, because sometimes true strength doesn't defend itself with noise. Sometimes truth doesn't need to shout over the mob. Sometimes it willingly absorbs the weight of the lies. Then comes the cross. This is where most people stop the story. They see it as a tragic end to a noble philosopher. But if you stop here, you miss the deepest layer of meaning in the universe. Because the cross is not just suffering, it is substitution. It is not only Roman punishment. It is divine purpose unfolding in its most extreme, agonizing form. He is mocked. He is physically broken. He is lifted up between two criminals, exposed to the elements and the ridicule of the crowd. And yet, even in unimaginable pain, there are words of forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Not revenge, not escape, forgiveness. Here, the pattern of his entire life reaches its sharpest, most undeniable point. Because everything up to this exact moment has been a downward movement in the eyes of the world, from heaven to a manger, to obscurity, to serving the sick, to washing feet, to the cross. But in a different dimension, something else entirely is happening. A debt is being paid. The gap between humanity and the divine is being bridged by the only one capable of making the crossing. Then comes death, and for a moment, it looks like silence wins. It looks like the story ends exactly where hope collapses. A sealed tomb, a heavy stone guarded by the military might of Rome. A completely closed ending. But this is where the delay reveals its purpose. Because on the third day, the stone is rolled away, not to let him out, but to show the world that he is already gone. What follows is not confusion, but encounter. He appears, not as a ghost, not as a fond memory kept alive by grieving friends, but as living, breathing proof. He appears to followers who had lost all hope, to people who had scattered in cowardice, to women who came to mourn, to those who thought the story was definitively over. And suddenly, everything they believed about loss, failure, and endings is completely rewritten. Because the resurrection doesn't just mean he is alive. It means death is no longer the final authority. It means the worst thing that can happen to you is no longer the last thing that happens to you. Now, step back and look at the full picture of this life. Look at the architecture: birth in obscurity, preparation in silence, identity affirmed in baptism, testing in the wilderness, ministry in humility, opposition in truth, betrayal in closeness, suffering in obedience, death in sacrifice, and resurrection in victory. It is not a random sequence of historical events. It is a pattern, and here is the comparison that quietly challenges every other system of thinking in our modern world. In our society, greatness is built upward. It is about visibility, power, control, and recognition. But in this life, greatness moves downward. Humility, service, sacrifice, surrender. And yet the outcome of that downward mobility is not defeat. It is life that cannot be contained by a grave. So the question becomes unavoidable for you and me: which pattern actually leads to lasting truth? The endless pursuit of self-exaltation, or the path of surrender and purpose? Because one builds a temporary reputation, but the other builds eternal transformation. And this is where the message is no longer just historical, it becomes deeply personal. Because the exact same pattern seen in the life of Jesus so often shows up in our human experience. You will face pressure before clarity. You will endure struggle before growth. You will experience loss before understanding. And you will sit in agonizing silence before the breakthrough comes. So maybe the story was never just about events in the first century. Maybe it was showing us something fundamental about how life itself works. And if that is true, then the question is not only what happened to him, but what happens in us when we choose to follow the same path of truth, even when it costs us everything? Because the resurrection is not only a triumphant conclusion to a story, it is an active invitation into a different way of seeing your life. A lens where endings are not always endings, where loss is not always final, and where truth is not measured by popularity, but by eternity. So as you sit with this, here is the final tension to carry with you. If this life truly overcame death itself, then what part of your own story might still be waiting for its turning point? Because sometimes what looks like a tragic ending is actually the exact place where something new begins. And maybe that is the quiet message. Hidden inside the life of Jesus, Christ all along, we are not just asked to believe the story. We are asked to recognize the pattern and decide what we will do with it.